But what I learned, Mike, was I could get better returns. My returns were going to double. I could get better tax benefits. I could get the depreciation that came through with those multifamily investments. And it was passive, so I didn't have to deal with it. Now, it wasn't perfect. That first investment I made actually had a capital call because a hurricane came through the area where the apartment was in Houston, and it blew the roof off of 20 of the units, and things kind of stalled. It ended up working out. We still made money on that investment.
Welcome to the Real Freedom Show, where we inspire you to pursue your passion to gain time and financial freedom through opportunities in real estate. I'm your host, Mike Swenson. Let's get some real freedom together. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Real Freedom, where we talk about different ways that people build time and financial freedom through opportunities in real estate. I'm your host, Mike Swenson. If you want to get started on your real estate journey, check out our website, freedomthroughrealestate.com. It's where we put all of our content, all of our great podcast episodes for you to be able to learn, listen, and hopefully be inspired by other people's stories of how they're pursuing that inside of their real estate career. Today, super excited. We've got an amazing guest, Chris Larsen. Chris has, I'm sure you'll share in your story, gone through some tough times early on, and you were able to see that people waiting till 65 to enjoy their retirement might not be the path that is worth taking. And so you got into real estate early, as well as the sales industry, and being able to see how high earners, aren't really focused as much on building great assets, and you are. So you run Next Level Income, helping accredited investors put their capital in commercial real estate syndications across multifamily, self-storage, car washes, senior housing, over $2 billion in acquisitions since 2016. Also author of the book, How to Be Financially Free by 40. Excited to hear from you, Chris, and have you on the show.
Mike, thanks for having me on. Yeah, love what you're doing with your podcast here and excited to talk about it. And yeah, this is one of the first episodes here. We're talking about our new book. So thank you for mentioning that.
Well, take us back a little bit. I love to hear people, kind of the question, why real estate, and kind of what took you down that original path, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. And if you're listening, that book's free. It's an ebook. You can go to nextlevelincome.com/financial freedom book and get your free copy. And it walks through, Mike, step by step, what I've learned through, successes, but also mistakes since I started at 21. And yeah, I bought my first property at 21, and really, kind of looking back through my life, you kind of mentioned some of the losses and some of the things that as I looked back over time, I realized it really became ingrained in my brain and put an urgency behind, really not only my search for financial freedom, but really, like you said, really making the most out of every day. My father passed away when I was 5. My best friend passed away when he was 18. I was 19. I watched my mother pass away from cancer in 2011, and I watched how she was trying to get to retirement as a teacher, but she got too sick too fast and wasn't able to take advantage of that. So, what we teach at Next Level Income is a lot like what you do, Mike, which is, teach people how to use investments that create passive cash flow to really replace, their expenses, their income, their active income, so that they can really live life on their own terms. And, for me, that started like you in residential real estate, and then, moved into commercial. We became passive investors back in 2013 in multifamily, specifically value add deals, which we're still a huge fan of. And, by about mid 30s, we were able to hit that point where I was still working, sometimes 60, 80, 100-hour weeks in medical device sales, but I didn't have to do it anymore. And that really gave me the opportunity to step back from being on call for 12 years, spend more time with my family. My boys are now 16 and 14, and we're able to make sure that we're focused on, the priorities in life. And, we started syndicating deals back in 2016, and we try to offer those to our investors as well, so they can, pursue the same life of freedom that we did as well.
Talk to us a little bit about, your colleagues in sales. Obviously you were focused on real estate, you had been exposed to it, but for people that maybe haven't, where are they kind of putting their eggs? What baskets, and kind of what are they thinking of in terms of how am I building this nest egg for the future outside of those real estate opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is exactly what I wrote the book about, which is, we're taught, as Robert Kiyosaki says in Rich Dad Poor Dad, go to school, get a degree, get a good job, invest for 40 years until you're 65, and then, hope that your money doesn't run out so you can, enjoy the years you have left. As I mentioned, that didn't work for my mother. She had a great pension, she had great health care. She had a great retirement plan, but she didn't even get to the point where she could enjoy any of that, unfortunately. So, even if you were like me, where you're in a sales career where you have a lot higher earning capacity, making, two, three, four, five, $600,000 a year, you're working a lot. And one of the things I've heard from so many investors over the years, Mike, is I just don't know if I can do this another 20 years. You hit that point where, you're in your late 30s, 40s, early 50s, and you say, well, I enjoy what I'm doing, but I don't know if I can do this another 10 or 20 years. And I'm missing my kids' events. I'm like me, I miss like Mother's Day or birthdays, and it just wears you out, and you just say, well, I don't know if I can do this. And what I found is if you take that old broken way of working towards retirement, which we hate that word in our house, it's a four-letter word, and move towards financial freedom, what happens is you say, wait a minute, I don't have to do this. And a lot of times when you don't have to do something, you either enjoy it more, or maybe you can take a slightly different option. We've got a lot of surgeons that are investors, and they say, oh, I'm working less hours, or I'm maybe working part-time, as a doctor, or they don't have as much pressure on them. So maybe they can, take a different role with a different institution, and those sorts of things. So I think, if you go from focusing on, save your income, put it into a 401k versus taking your excess savings and putting into cash flow investments. Real estate is our favorite, as it sounds like is yours, and probably a lot of you all listening here today. That creates true freedom, not this, accumulation, but this replacement of income is what we talk about.
I was meeting with a group of people last week, and people that maybe had invested in a single family home or a duplex, maybe had a
Yeah.
bad experience.
Yeah.
And so they are heavily invested in 401ks and stocks and things like that.
Yeah.
And when I was talking about real estate, they were, I guess, skeptical in their approach, like in their
Yeah.
questions. Like, well, what I argued is, stocks out of your control in some ways. You've got C-level
Mhm.
employees making decisions and shareholders and boards of directors that you have to answer to. And so they're not always making
Yeah.
decisions in your best interest. In real estate, you're more in control of that. And they
Yeah.
had said, well, but well, the market's been tough. Interest rates are
Yeah.
high. Values can go down. Why would I want to invest in that? And
Yeah.
so for people out there that aren't ready to take that initial risk, how do you
Yeah.
approach those questions with people about
Yeah.
why real estate is a good option to be able to create that cash flow? Because they might hear, shoot, with interest rates as high as they are, I don't know if I can get cash flow.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So let me break that into a couple pieces with the answer. So number one, the stock market goes up and down. We have record high PE multiples, market could drop, 20, 30, 40%. We got central bank intervention. We could go on and on about, that sort of thing. But, there's so many risk variables when it comes to owning a stock or, the stock market. And look, real estate has its risks as well.
Mhm.
Whether you're talking about single family, right now prices are super high, interest rates are super high. It's hard to make a piece of single family real estate cash flow today. Multifamily, yeah, it's been a tough market the past few years. We're seeing some really great discounts right now in the market, as you probably are as well, Mike. So, we're picking up a deal right now with assumable debt in Houston, Texas, and it's going to be great cash flow from day one. It's going to have a heavy value, a pretty large value add component, but low LTV. So I think as you're getting into those initial investments as an investor, you have to walk before you run. You have to understand the different components. And what I would say to anyone like you were mentioning, Mike, is don't invest before you're have an understanding or have a
Mhm.
degree of comfort. You're
Yep.
going to have to take a leap of faith to a certain degree at some point. But the other thing is, there are different areas. Like we have a debt fund, it's a hard money lending fund. So investors can get 6 to 10%. The money's liquid, they can get their money back in 90 days. That's a way for a lot of our investors that, say, well, I'm not really sure yet. they can kind of dip their toe in. They can get cash flow from day one. We actually have a private credit fund, so it allows investors to invest throughout the capital stack. So, there's what I would say to an investor like that is there's single family, there's multifamily, there's other commercial properties out there, but you can also invest on the debt side. So when rates are really high like they are now, and you're the bank as we are in those two funds that I mentioned, you can get double digit cash flow and not necessarily have to lock your money up. Now, that doesn't necessarily have all the same benefits that we love, with your traditional multifamily where you get, longer term appreciation, you get depreciation on that. But what I would say to those investors is there's other options out there where you can kind of walk before you run in these investments. And again, when rates are high, you can be the bank in a lot of ways, and you can take advantage of the high interest rates and the equity that's in those properties.
Bigger question that I was planning on getting into kind of early
Yeah,
on, but take us back a little bit to your early days. Obviously you're in medical device sales. You talked about that. You've got your peers running in one direction. You're kind of thinking about a different direction.
yeah,
Talk about being able to balance your starting slow, picking up momentum while
yeah.
working your 60, 80, 100 hour a week job
Yeah.
and kind of trying to do both paths at the same time.
Yeah, so I think I had a benefit. I had somebody hand me a copy of Rich Dad Poor Dad in a bookstore back in 2000, and I read it. And Robert Kiyosaki talked about becoming accredited, and he was a sales guy and got into real estate, which really resonated with me. I'd already bought my first single family property, so a lot of people ask me, Mike, when they learn about my story, they say, "Well, when did you move from medical device sales to real estate?" However, that's wrong. I actually got into real estate. I bought my first piece of property at 21 in college. I bought the next one the following year. I continued to acquire properties after that, but I ran out of money, so I needed a career that would fuel my investments. And that led me to look for careers that would help me to become accredited, which again, I've read that in Rich Dad Poor Dad. I was like, well, hey, I want to be accredited. I want to get access to, these syndications. I know you guys do 506B offerings, which has a little more leeway for investors that
Hmm.
might be a little bit earlier on in their journey, which is awesome. That's how we started as well. But so my focus, Mike, was if I can buy a property or make an investment every year for 10 years, within 10 years, I should have enough, passive income to, support my lifestyle. Now, what I will say is it took us a little longer because the great financial crisis hit, kind of right in the middle of that. So that kind of,
Hmm.
slowed it down. But if you take a long-term approach, you say, hey, I'm going to make 150 or $100,000 investment a year for 10 years. It's incredible what that compounding effect does over time. So, I think you have to take a long-term view of that, which is what I did. I said, hey, I actually looked at 15 years because I bought my first property at 21. My goal was to be financially independent by 35. So I said, hey, 15 years, if I can buy these single family properties and pay them off in 15 years, I'm set. I'll have 10 grand a month coming in. We
Hmm.
eventually moved into multifamily because it was easier to scale. There was less work. We didn't have to, sign our personal credit for those properties. I didn't have to get the phone calls like I did on my honeymoon in Costa Rica, from one of my tenants and have to deal with some headaches with respect to that. So again, what I did was I took a long-term view. I'd say 5, 10, 15 years is a great timeline. And then
Hmm.
when you focus on that, it's very motivating because you see that cash flow build, every quarter, every year, and you're motivated to save more and make more. And in my book, I talk about kind of the steps you can take to automate that savings, save before you spend, and really hypercharge that savings and that investment.
So talk about, as people start small and scale big, obviously you mentioned, starting small for you and picking up
Yep.
properties. When and kind of how did you get into some of the larger multifamily or maybe
Yeah.
kind of mid-size into the larger multifamily?
Yeah. So, during one of those pivotal points, my mom had passed away a year later. My wife and I, she gave birth to our second son. And we did this assessment, and I was looking at all my portfolio, and I was getting like a 7% return on the equity in my single family properties. And this was back in 2012. I was like, man, after paying tax, because I'd phased out of some of the tax benefits I got when I was making less money. And after I got married, our tax rate, doubled. So, if you think about that, my tax rate was like 10%, then it went to 20%, but we were making three times more. So, I was paying, what is that, like 60% more tax than I was when I was single. So I was like, okay, this is great. We're making more money, but we're paying so much in tax. We're paying six figures in tax. Um, there's got to be a better way. And I was talking to somebody in a meeting, like a mastermind meeting that I was with my wife, and he said, "Oh, you should look into multifamily investments." And this was
Hmm.
end of 2012, and I was like, "Yeah, I've looked into it a while back. It's a little different." He goes, "Well, there's some cool tax benefits," and I was like, "All right, I need to take another look." So he introduced me to his friend that is still a friend of mine. We actually did our first acquisition as a JV partnership with them in 2016 on a 100-unit property we bought in Atlanta, which we're actually selling. By the time this podcast airs, we'll probably sell it. It's been 10 years, which is kind of exciting. But what I learned, Mike, was I could get better returns. My returns were going to double. I could get better tax benefits. I could get the depreciation that came through with those multifamily investments. And it was passive, so I didn't have to deal with it. Now, it wasn't perfect. That first investment I made actually had a capital call because a hurricane came through the area where the apartment was in Houston, and it blew the roof off of 20 of the units, and things kind of stalled. It ended up working out. We still made money on that investment, but I wanted to highlight that because you are investing in real property, which has inflation benefits, it has cash flow benefits, it has depreciation benefits. But there's real world risks out there. We live in Asheville, North Carolina. We got hit by Hurricane Helene, and
Hmm.
it really had a really negative effect on our local properties. So, I think as long as you're going into things eyes wide open, that's really important. But I still am a believer in multifamily. I sold all my single family rentals. Um, since that first investment. And, it's overall been a very positive experience. And, we started syndicating deals, but even when I was working, it was a lot easier to scale our investments without having to go and, manage the single family rentals and deal with tenant turnover and, do all of those things myself where I could go make more money, improving my business in the medical device side.
It's a challenging piece, working with investors because, you're trying to project a future that you don't know what's going
Yeah.
to happen,
Yeah.
and you're basing it on, percentage of income increase, percentage of expense increase, and this and that and the other. And then, like you said,
Yeah.
life happens.
Yeah.
Hopefully, most apartment buildings don't have hurricanes that come through, so
Yeah.
that's probably on the high
Yeah.
end in terms of the risks that can happen. But
Yeah.
you do have tenant issues and
Yeah.
whatever it might be, and so that's the tough part is you're trying to make an investor feel safe and secure in their investment,
Yeah.
and yet knowing that life happens. And the phrase I kind of use is this is real people, right? Real people
Yep.
are managing the properties, living in the
Yeah.
properties, and stuff happens. And
Yeah.
so we're not trying to, it's that balance of not wanting to overpromise and underdeliver. You want to try to
Yeah.
underpromise and overdeliver, but yeah, you're trying to
Yeah.
get an investor to be excited about putting their money with you. And so it's that happy
Yeah.
medium of trying to
Yeah.
project positivity and yet let them know the risks that are in play there.
Exactly. And you bring up a great point, which is, you need to invest with an operator that you trust and that can say, hey, here's our track record. If you're an investor, great questions are, hey, like, tell me about some of the downsides that could happen. Like, how would you deal with those? Like, what did you all do when the roof blew off of the apartments? Okay, well, this is what happened and this is what it looked like. And, it's like, okay, like I can manage that because they communicated to me. They told me what was going on. And that, I'll tell you what, that is a lot better than if you're invested in the stock market and there's a CEO scandal or, the market drops because, somebody bombs Iran. There's all
Hmm.
these things, there's all these variables out there. With the stock market, we're kind of used to it because we've seen it if we've been
Hmm.
investing for a long time. So,
Yep.
if you're new, it's good to ask those questions. And I think, you need to be comfortable with the uncertainty that's out there. Just like anything, if you get in your car and you drive to the store today or you drive to work today, that's probably the biggest risk you're going to take today in anything you do. There's a lot of uncertainty there,
Hmm.
but we're comfortable with it because we know that there's a real benefit to having the freedom and the ability to move around with the risk of potentially getting into a car accident and having something like that happen. So there's risks in all areas of life, and you just need to be comfortable with those. But as I talked about in my first book, the risk adjusted returns in multifamily are superior or the same or superior to anything else out there. So, even with that risk baked in, the returns are still fantastic.
Now, you've dipped into other asset classes,
Yeah.
self-storage, car wash, senior housing, things like that. You mentioned,
Yeah.
kind of the debt funds, different
Yeah.
things that you have.
Yeah.
Talk about kind of that expansion from single family, small multifamily, mid-sized multifamily to now
Yeah.
looking at some other asset classes and some other things that you guys are doing.
Yeah, so if you had to pin me down, Mike, and say, hey, what's your favorite asset class? It would still be multifamily residential real estate. I think the demographics are terrific. It's still way more affordable to rent than it is to buy right now. For mobility, for multiple different reasons, renting is still very popular in this country, and we don't have enough supply. We're still undersupplied, especially in terms of affordable product that's out there. But we've got a lot of investors with a lot of investments in multifamily. And, I personally have branched out to, some of those other asset classes, and some of those we did offer to investors as well. So if you've been investing for a period of time, I would say, first off, you want to invest in what makes sense to you, as I mentioned earlier. So if you say, hey, I've been talking to Mike, these multifamily properties make a lot of sense from demographics. I understand the cash flow, the tax benefits. That's great. But let's say you've been investing for 5 or 10 years and you say, well, I've got all this money, just like in the stock market, I've got all this money in large cap stocks. Maybe you diversify into some small cap stocks. Maybe you diversify into some international stocks. Maybe you have some bonds in your portfolio. I have an MBA in portfolio management, and that's what you do to lower your risk. So you diversify. And as we grew our investment portfolio, we diversified into some of these other complementary asset classes. Now, I will say, still at the core of all of those investments is the value add strategy. What we love to do is we love to go in, I think, as you guys do too, Mike, and buy a
Hmm.
property, either fix it up physically, as we're doing with this property in Houston, or improve it operationally. And when you do that, you can get great cash flow from the outset. You can increase cash flow over time, and you can force appreciation upward when you do that. So, whether it's been multifamily or self-storage or the car washes or the senior housing, they all, for the most part, have that value add component across those different asset classes. So again, I would say if you're getting started, I think multifamily is a great place to start out. Again, given the risks, but even in multifamily, you can invest in ground up development. You can buy brand new like lease up deals. You can, buy a value add deal like we're buying that's not that old. It's never been, never had any repairs. Or you could buy something that maybe is 30, 40 years old. You can, we've done some different projects with the city of Houston where we go in and we have an affordability component where we put it in different tax programs as a part of our value add. So I would say even if you're investing in, one specific type of asset, there's a lot of different flavors in that. So I don't want to dump too much on the listeners here today.
Hmm.
But pick an asset class that you're interested in, learn about that, work with an operator like yourself, Mike, that understands it, deeply in a specific area. Make your investments there when you feel comfortable, and maybe that's all you do. Maybe you only invest in multifamily or single family. But if you have a large portfolio and you want to start diversifying out, then you can start looking into those other asset classes as well.
Are you looking to get started or scale in real estate investing but don't know your next step? Are you overwhelmed thinking about finding deals, analyzing deals, doing due diligence, and managing properties on top of it? Go ahead and push the easy button and invest with us. Real estate investing is what we do full time. We've done dozens of deals with hundreds of doors. We have the knowledge and experience to handpick the best deals that most investors can't find. We've got large off-market deals all the time where you can hopefully find returns and economies of scale that you just can't find on your own. The best thing is it's 100% passive to you for less capital than you put down trying to acquire a property on your own. Don't let this year go by where you don't make the leap, add to your portfolio, or you just sit in analysis by paralysis. To find out more, visit freedomthroughrealestate.com and click on invest. You can book a call and learn more there. So get to scaling your portfolio now with us by your side. That's freedomthroughrealestate.com and click on invest. And I think the key is, for people to remember is it takes time, just like you had mentioned, your 15-year plan. There are some quicker wins that you could have in real estate, but in general, if we're investing in these types of assets, we're playing the long game, taking advantage of those tax benefits, things like that. Cash flow is going to grow, the value of the asset's going to grow, but it's not a quick win. And so you do take a long-term approach, just like if I'm saving for retirement, my 401k, I'm planning on 15, 20, 30 years of doing that. In real estate, we're looking for the same. So it's not, hey, year one, what's happening? How quick of returns am I getting? It's a different approach, right?
It is. Yeah. And I like to say real estate's a get rich slow strategy. I mean, if you buy and hold real estate for a long period of time, you pay off the debt, you're probably going to make a lot of money. It might be 20 years down the road. Like that first property I bought, Mike, we sold it in 2015. We did a 1031 exchange. Now I paid $90,000. I put $3,000 down. I sold that property. I took that equity. I bought an office in downtown Asheville and paid no tax because it was a 1031 exchange. My cash flow each month from that property was $3,000 a month. Now that was 15 years later, but I turned a $3,000 down payment over 15 years into $3,000 a month. And we just sold that property last year, and more than for more than double what we paid for it. So, again, if you take a longer term approach and you're patient and you're not looking for those quick pops, is it going to take you 15 years? It doesn't have to. It could take you, like I talk about in the new book, in 7 years, if you can save 50% of your income at a 15% IRR, which, a lot of multifamily deals do that, you can replace your current income, your current expenses. So I think 7 years is an actual achievable timeline if everything is going well. 5 is really quick. 15 is quite conservative, but I think if you set that 15 years and you get there in 10 or 7, then you're going to be pretty happy with that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you, Chris, so much for coming on and sharing your story. For people that do want to reach out to you, learn more about Next Level Income and your books, how can they do so?
Yeah, check us out at nextlevelincome.com. Our new book just launched is, how to become financially independent by 40. Go to nextlevelincome.com/financial freedom book and download your free copy. You can also book a call with our team if you want to learn about our investment opportunities that are out there, as we talked about the debt fund, the private credit fund, as well as our multifamily offerings.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing, Chris, and just a great story. And it's fun to see people that do prioritize this and don't follow the trend of sales. And obviously there's a lot of great things in sales, and I've had a ton of people on here, they're in sales and I'm like, wait a minute,
that's all right. Yeah.
This isn't good. Or they end up getting into real estate and it turns into a second job for them, and then they're like, oh geez, now I've got my sales job and my real estate job. So excited to see you take the path less traveled and one that produced some success for you. So congratulations on all of that.
Well, Mike, thanks for doing this podcast. Thank you for listening today, and thanks for letting me share a little bit about my story.